Laura Mitchell sat in her pristine Chicago kitchen, steam rising from her untouched coffee as she stared at the credit card statement in her hands. 23 years of marriage had taught her to recognize patterns, and this one made her stomach clench with a familiar dread she'd been ignoring for months. Le Bernardin, New York, 347 Tiffany & Co., 2,150. The Plaza Hotel, 890. Her husband Marcus had claimed he was in Cleveland for a construction conference last week. She remembered because she'd specifically asked him to bring back some of that artisanal honey they'd discovered on their anniversary trip there 5 years ago. The front door slammed, jolting her from her thoughts. Marcus's heavy footsteps echoed through their Winnetka home as he dropped his briefcase in the foyer with his usual theatrical sigh. "Long day?" Laura called out, her voice steady despite the paper trembling slightly in her grip. "You have no idea," Marcus replied, loosening his tie as he entered the kitchen. At 52, he still carried himself with the confidence that had first attracted her in college, though the extra weight around his middle and the carefully styled gray at his temples now seemed more calculated than natural. "The Peterson project is falling apart, and I had to fly out to New York to meet with their investors." Laura's eyes never left his face. "New York? I thought you said Cleveland yesterday." A microsecond of panic flashed across his features before he recovered, with a practiced laugh. "Did I? God, I'm more tired than I thought. Cleveland was last week. This week was New York." He moved to the refrigerator, his back to her now. "You know how these business trips blur together." She folded the statement carefully, her movements deliberate. "Of course they do. How was your dinner? Eat anywhere nice?" "Just grabbed something quick at the hotel. You know how I hate eating alone in fancy places." The lie hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Laura had spent 2 decades learning to read Marcus's tells, the way he touched his wedding ring when he was nervous, how his voice pitched slightly higher when he wasn't telling the truth, the subtle shift in his posture when he was deflecting. "I'm going to take a bath," she announced, standing and smoothing her skirt. "There's leftover lasagna in the fridge." As she walked past him, Marcus caught her arm gently. "Hey, everything okay? You seem distant lately." Laura looked down at his hand on her arm, noting the absence of his wedding ring's usual tan line. When had he stopped wearing it? "Just tired, I guess. Work's been intense. Maybe we should plan a getaway. Just the 2 of us. It's been too long since we had some real time together." The suggestion might have warmed her heart 6 months ago. Now, it felt like salt in a wound she was only beginning to acknowledge. "Maybe. Let me think about it." In their master bathroom, Laura locked the door and sat on the edge of their marble bathtub, pulling out her phone. Her fingers hesitated over the keypad before she typed a name she'd hoped never to research: Sophia Chen. The results made her heart sink further. 26 years old, marketing coordinator at Mitchell Construction, Marcus's company. The LinkedIn photos showed a stunning young woman with long black hair and a bright smile, posed in what Laura now recognized as the conference room of Marcus's office. Laura scrolled through more photos, her trained eye, honed by 15 years, as a financial analyst before she'd stepped back to support Marcus's growing business, cataloging details. Sophia at company events, always positioned near Marcus. Sophia at the office Christmas party, wearing what looked suspiciously like a Tiffany necklace that matched the charge on their credit card. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Kate. "Coffee tomorrow? I have some gossip about the Hendersons. Divorce that'll make your day." Laura stared at the message, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. She'd always found comfort in other people's relationship drama, secure in the knowledge that her own marriage was solid. Marcus might work too much, and yes, they'd grown apart over the years, but they had history. They had a life together. She typed back, "Rain check. Need to handle some things at home." The bathwater was scalding as she slipped into it, but the way heat felt appropriate somehow. She needed to think clearly, to separate emotion from fact. Her analytical mind, the one that had once identified fraudulent patterns in corporate accounts, began to work. If Marcus was having an affair, and the evidence was pointing increasingly in that direction, she needed more than suspicious credit card charges and a pretty face on LinkedIn. She needed proof. Real, undeniable, legally admissible proof. Over the next 3 days, Laura fell into a routine that felt surreal in its normalcy. She made Marcus breakfast, kissed him goodbye, went to her part-time consulting job at the accounting firm, came home, and cooked dinner. But underneath the familiar rhythms, she was documenting everything. She photographed every receipt, every credit card statement, every unexplained charge. She noted the times Marcus claimed to be working late, cross-referencing them with his actual office schedule by calling his assistant under the pretense of coordinating his calendar. She created spreadsheets tracking his patterns, his lies, his expenses. The breakthrough came on Thursday evening. Marcus had claimed another late meeting, but Laura's drive past his office showed an empty parking lot at 8 p.m. On impulse, she decided to swing by Sophia's apartment complex, an upscale building in Lincoln Park that seemed far too expensive for a marketing coordinator's salary. Marcus's black BMW was parked in the visitors section. Laura sat in her car across the street, hands gripping the steering wheel as her world tilted on its axis. Seeing the evidence was different from suspecting it. This was real. This was happening. She took photos with her phone, capturing the license plate, the timestamp, the building address. Then she waited. 2 hours later, Marcus emerged from the building with Sophia beside him. Even from a distance, their body language told the story Laura had been dreading. His hand on the small of her back, her head tilted toward his shoulder. As they walked, the easy intimacy that spoke of familiarity and comfort. Laura watched as Marcus kissed Sophia goodbye, not a quick peck, but a lingering kiss that belonged to lovers, not colleagues. When Sophia disappeared back into the building, Marcus stood for a moment on the sidewalk, checking his phone before getting into his car. Laura's own phone buzzed with a text. "Just wrapping up here. Be home in 20. Love you." The casual cruelty of it, the ease with which he lied, the automatic "love you" that now felt like mockery, ignited something in Laura that she hadn't felt in years. Not just anger, but a cold, focused determination. She drove home carefully, her mind already 3 steps ahead. By the time Marcus walked through their front door 25 minutes later, she was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open, appearing to work on client files. "How was your meeting?" she asked without looking up. "Productive. Long, but productive." He kissed the top of her head, and Laura had to resist the urge to flinch. "What are you working on?" "The Morrison account. They're worried about some irregularities in their books." She glanced up at him with a smile that felt like wearing a mask. "You know how it is when someone's been hiding something. The numbers always tell the truth eventually." Marcus nodded absently, already reaching for his phone. "I'm going to grab a shower. Early morning tomorrow." As his footsteps receded upstairs, Laura opened a new browser window and began researching divorce attorneys in Chicago. Not just any attorneys, the ones with reputations for being thorough, aggressive, and absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting their clients' interests. She had 23 years of marriage to protect, along with half of everything Marcus thought was his alone. If he wanted to throw away their life together for a woman barely older than their hypothetical daughter, he was going to learn exactly what that choice would cost him. Laura made her first appointment for Friday afternoon, using a fake name and paying cash for a consultation. She had evidence to gather, assets to catalog, and a strategy to develop. The perfect lie had unraveled, but Laura Mitchell was just getting started. Laura's hands remained steady as she signed the retainer agreement in the downtown Chicago office of Blackstone and Associates. Across from her, attorney Victoria Blackstone reviewed the documents Laura had compiled over the past 2 weeks with the focused intensity of a surgeon examining x-rays. "This is impressive work," Victoria said, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun that matched her reputation as one of Chicago's most feared divorce attorneys. "Most clients come to me with suspicions and emotions. You've brought me a case file." Laura had spent 14 days transforming herself into a detective. While Marcus believed she was simply busy with work, she'd been systematically documenting every aspect of their shared life. Bank statements going back 5 years, property deeds, business records, insurance policies, investment accounts, everything that represented the financial foundation of their marriage. "I've been a financial analyst for most of my career," Laura explained. "I know how to follow money trails. And this trail leads exactly where we need it to go." Victoria tapped a particular page. "Your husband has been financing this affair with marital assets for at least 8 months. The apartment lease for Miss Chen, the jewelry purchases, the travel expenses. He's been using your joint accounts to fund his new relationship." Laura nodded, though seeing it laid out so clinically still sent a spike of pain through her chest. "What are my options?" Victoria leaned back in her leather chair. "In Illinois, we have no-fault divorce, which means the affair itself won't impact the division of assets significantly. However, the financial misconduct, using marital funds for an extramarital relationship, gives us substantial leverage, Pulled out a legal pad and began sketching out a strategy. "The business complicates things. Mitchell Construction has grown significantly during your marriage, which means you're entitled to a portion of its value. But if we can prove he's been using company resources for personal matters..." "He has been." Laura opened her laptop and pulled up a series of photographs. "Sophia Chen is employed by his company, but I've documented at least 12 instances where she's accompanied him on business trips that had nothing to do with marketing. The company paid for her travel, her meals, her accommodation." Victoria's smile was sharp as a blade. "Corporate funds used for personal relationships. That's breach of fiduciary duty, potentially fraud depending on how the business is structured." She made several notes. "What about the business accounts? Do you have access?" Laura hesitated. This was where her plan moved from reactive to proactive, from gathering evidence to actively taking control. "I've been the bookkeeper for the company since Marcus started it. I have access to everything." "Good. We're going to need complete financial records." "And Laura?" Victoria's tone became conspiratorial. "I need you to understand that once we file, this becomes war. Your husband will likely cut off your access to funds, change passwords, potentially attempt to hide assets. We need to be prepared for that." Laura thought of Marcus at home, probably texting Sophia about their weekend plans while sitting in the living room she'd decorated with such care. "I understand. What do I need to do?" The next 2 weeks felt like living in a parallel universe. By day, Laura maintained the facade of normalcy, making Marcus coffee, asking about his work, even helping him select a tie for what he claimed was an important client meeting, but which she knew was actually a dinner date with Sophia. By night, she systematically gathered every piece of information Victoria had requested. She downloaded bank statements, photographed important documents, and created backup copies of everything on encrypted drives she kept in a safety deposit box Marcus didn't know about. The breakthrough came when she discovered Marcus had opened a new credit card account without telling her. The statements, delivered to his office, showed a pattern of charges that made Laura's stomach turn. A weekend at a luxury resort in Wisconsin, expensive dinners at restaurants she'd suggested for their own anniversary, only to be told they were too fancy, jewelry purchases that had never made their way to her. But the most damaging discovery was Marcus's communication with a real estate agent about a condo in downtown Chicago. According to the email chain Laura found in his laptop while he showered, he was planning to purchase a property for himself and Sophia, after handling some personal matters. Laura photographed everything, her hands shaking with rage rather than fear now. Marcus wasn't just having an affair. He was planning a complete life with Sophia, using their shared assets to fund it, all while keeping Laura in the dark about his intentions. The final straw came on a Tuesday evening when Marcus announced he needed to work late again. Laura followed him, parking across from Sophia's building just as she had weeks earlier. But this time, instead of simply documenting their meeting, she waited until they left together and followed them to a high-end restaurant in River North. From her car, Laura watched through the restaurant's large windows as Marcus and Sophia sat at an intimate corner table. Marcus was animated, gesturing with his hands in a way she recognized from their early dating days. Sophia was laughing, leaning forward, playing with her hair, the universal language of new love that Laura remembered from her own courtship with Marcus 25 years ago. But what made Laura's blood run cold was the small gift box Marcus pushed across the table. Even from a distance, she could see Sophia's delighted reaction as she opened it, the way she immediately put on what looked like earrings, the kiss she gave Marcus across the table. Laura took photos of everything, but she also made a decision that night. She was done being a passive observer in the destruction of her own life. It was time to take control. The next morning, while Marcus was in his office, Laura made several phone calls. First to Victoria, updating her on the new evidence and confirming their timeline. Then to her own banker, asking about the process for securing marital assets during divorce proceedings. Finally, to a private investigator Victoria had recommended. "I don't need you to prove the affair," Laura told Jake Morrison, a former Chicago police detective who now specialized in matrimonial cases. "I can do that myself. I need you to document every violation of his fiduciary duty to the business, every instance where he's used company resources for personal matters, and every asset he might be trying to hide." Jake, a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes, nodded approvingly. "Most wives come to me wanting pictures of the cheating. You want financial records. I like that. Pictures of cheating might hurt my feelings, but financial records will hurt his wallet." Within 3 days, Jake had provided Laura with documentation that made her case ironclad. Marcus had used company funds to pay for Sophia's health insurance, had given her a company credit card for business expenses that were clearly personal, and had been routing business through shell companies that he partially owned. Companies that Laura, despite being married to him, had no legal interest in. "He's been planning this for a while," Jake explained as they met in a coffee shop in Evanston. "The shell companies, the separate accounts, the real estate investments in his name only. This isn't just an affair, Laura. This is financial abandonment with intent to defraud." Laura stared at the documents, feeling a strange sense of clarity. For months, she'd blamed herself for not being enough, for not seeing the signs sooner, for somehow failing as a wife. But this evidence showed Marcus's betrayal was calculated and deliberate. He hadn't fallen out of love. He'd decided to steal their life together. That evening, Laura cooked Marcus's favorite dinner, pot roast with all the fixings, the meal she'd made for every birthday and celebration of their marriage. She set the table with their good china, lit candles, and opened a bottle of wine. Marcus seemed genuinely surprised and pleased. "What's the occasion?" "No occasion," Laura replied, serving him a generous portion. "Just felt like doing something nice for my husband." They ate in companionable silence, discussing their days, their plans for the weekend, the normal rhythms of a long marriage. Marcus seemed relaxed, even affectionate, reaching across to squeeze her hand. "I love you, you know," he said suddenly. "I know I've been distracted with work lately, but I want you to know how much you mean to me." Laura looked into his eyes, the same brown eyes she'd fallen in love with in college, and saw a stranger. Someone who could lie so effortlessly, who could plan such an elaborate betrayal while sitting at their kitchen table eating the dinner she'd made with her own hands. "I love you too," she replied, and meant it in a way that was going to make what came next so much more satisfying. The next morning, after Marcus left for work, Laura made one final call to Victoria. "I'm ready," she said simply. "Are you sure?" Once we file, there's no going back. This becomes public record, and things are going to get very complicated very quickly. Laura thought about the woman she'd been 6 weeks ago. Trusting, passive, willing to ignore red flags for the sake of peace. That woman was gone, replaced by someone harder and infinitely more dangerous. I'm sure. Let's destroy them. Laura stood in front of her bathroom mirror at 5:47 a.m., applying mascara with the same precision she'd once used to audit corporate books. Today was the day Marcus would discover that his carefully constructed double life was about to implode. Her phone showed a text from Victoria. Papers filed at 9 a.m. Sheriff will serve at his office at 10:30. Be ready. Laura had choreographed this morning like a military operation. Marcus would go to work as usual, completely unaware that his world was about to change. Meanwhile, Laura would execute the next phase of her plan, one that Victoria had crafted with ruthless efficiency. "Morning, beautiful," Marcus said, appearing in the bathroom doorway in his undershirt and suit pants. He kissed her cheek, his cologne the same scent he'd worn throughout their marriage. "Sleep well?" "Like a baby," Laura replied, which was actually true. For the first time in weeks, she'd slept soundly, the peace that comes with finally taking action. Marcus adjusted his tie in the mirror beside her. "I might be late tonight. Johnson wants to go over the Riverside project proposals." Laura knew from Jake's surveillance that Marcus had dinner reservations at Alinea, Chicago's most expensive restaurant, with Sophia. The reservation was under the name Chen, and Marcus had charged the deposit to a company credit card. "Course you will be," Laura said, handing him his coffee in the travel mug she'd bought him for their 10th anniversary. "Have a good day, honey." After Marcus left, Laura moved with clinical precision. First, she removed the last items from their safety deposit box: family jewelry, important documents, and the $50,000 in cash she'd quietly accumulated over the past month by making small withdrawals from various accounts. At 8 a.m., she met Jake at a Starbucks near Marcus's office building. "Everything's in place," he confirmed. "The moment those papers are served, I'll be positioned to document his reaction and anyone he calls or meets with." Laura nodded, checking her phone. "Victoria?" "Standing by." "Once service is confirmed, we execute phase 2. At exactly 10:30 a.m., Laura was sitting in Victoria's office when the call came. Marcus had been served with divorce papers in his office, in front of Sophia and 2 other employees. According to the sheriff's deputy, Marcus had gone pale, asked for privacy, and immediately called Laura's phone. Laura watched it ring, letting it go to voicemail. He called 4 more times in rapid succession. "Now," Victoria said. Laura opened her laptop and accessed the online banking for all their joint accounts. With Victoria guiding her through the legal requirements, she transferred exactly half of their liquid assets into a new account in her name only, money she was legally entitled to as a spouse, but which Marcus had assumed would remain accessible to him. Next, she changed the passwords on all business accounts where she was an authorized user. As the company bookkeeper, she had legitimate access, but now Marcus would find himself locked out of his own financial systems. Her phone rang again. "Marcus." "This time?" she answered. "Laura, what the hell is going on?" His voice was strained, barely, controlled. "I just got served with divorce papers at my office, in front of everyone." "I know," Laura said calmly. "I filed them." Silence. Then, "Why didn't you talk to me first? If you're unhappy, we can work things out. We can go to counseling, take that vacation we talked about." "Marcus, stop." Laura's voice cut through his panic. "I know about Sophia." Another silence, longer this time. When Marcus spoke again, his tone had shifted to something she'd never heard before, desperate but calculating. "Laura, listen to me. Whatever you think you know, I know you've been having an affair for at least 8 months. I know you've been using our money to finance it. I know about the apartment you're paying for, the trips, the jewelry, The company credit card you gave her. Laura's voice remained steady, almost conversational. I know about the condo you're planning to buy together. And I know about the business accounts you've been hiding from me. Jesus Christ, Laura. Have you been spying on me? I've been protecting myself, Marcus. Something I should have started doing the first time you lied to my face about working late. She could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the line. Okay. You're right. I made mistakes. But we can fix this. No, we can't. Laura looked at Victoria, who nodded encouragingly. You made a choice to betray our marriage, to steal from our joint assets, and to plan a future that didn't include me. Now you get to live with the consequences. What do you want? Marcus's voice had gone cold now, the mask finally slipping completely. Money? The house? What's it going to take? I want what I'm legally entitled to, which is half of everything we built together during our marriage. That includes half the value of your business, half our investments, half our real estate holdings, and compensation for the marital funds you've wasted on your girlfriend. That's insane. The business is mine. I built it. Actually, Marcus, you built it during our marriage, using my unpaid labor as your bookkeeper, with loans secured against our joint assets, and with my income supporting us during the lean years. Illinois law is very clear about this, Victoria had coached Laura on this conversation, helping her understand that Marcus would likely go through several phases: denial, bargaining, anger, and finally acceptance. They were moving quickly through the progression. You can't just take half my business, Laura. It'll destroy everything I've worked for. You destroyed everything you worked for when you decided Sophia Chen was worth more than 23 years of marriage. Laura's mask slipped for just a moment, a flash of real pain breaking through her composed exterior. You want to know what's insane, Marcus? Insane is lying to your wife every day while planning to leave her. Insane is using the money she helped you earn to wine and dine your mistress. Don't call her that. The protectiveness in his voice, the same tone he'd once used to defend Laura from his critical mother, cut deeper than any of his lies. This wasn't just an affair. He was in love with Sophia, had probably been planning to ask for a divorce eventually, maybe after securing more assets or finding a way to minimize Laura's claim to the business. Fine, Laura said. Your girlfriend. The one whose apartment lease you're paying, whose health insurance you're covering through the company, whose credit card bills you've been handling for months. What do you think the IRS will make of those unreported benefits? What do you think your business insurance will say about the personal liability you've created? Another long silence. Laura could picture Marcus in his office, probably running his hands through his hair, the way he did when he was truly cornered. What happens now? He asked finally. Now you call your lawyer. And Marcus, you're going to need a very good one. We're requesting a complete audit of all business finances, a forensic accounting of every dollar you've spent on Sophia, and an immediate restraining order preventing you from accessing or moving any marital assets. A restraining order? Laura, come on. You've already proven you can't be trusted with our money. The court will decide what you can and cannot access going forward. Victoria scribbled a note and pushed it toward Laura. He'll try to turn this around now, make you the villain. Don't take the bait. Look, I know I hurt you, Marcus said, his voice taking on the placating tone he'd always used when he wanted something. But this is extreme, Laura. We were happy once. We can be civilized. About this, we were happy, Laura agreed, right up until you decided to fall in love with someone else while lying to me about it. There's nothing civilized about what you did, Marcus. But there will be something fair about how this ends. She hung up before he could respond. Within an hour, Laura's phone was buzzing with calls and texts. Marcus, obviously, but also his business partner Ron, his secretary, even his mother. The news was spreading through their social circle like wildfire. The most interesting call came from an unknown number at 2 p.m. Mrs. Mitchell, this is Sophia Chen. Laura had wondered when this moment would come. She'd imagined it dozens of times. But hearing Sophia's voice, younger than expected, with a slight tremor of uncertainty, was still surreal. "Ms. Chen, I wondered if you'd call." "Mrs. Mitchell, I want you to know that I never meant for things to happen this way. Marcus told me your marriage was over, that you two were just going through the motions until what, Sophia? Until he could figure out how to divorce me without losing half his assets?" Silence. "Let me guess," Laura continued. "He told you I was cold, distant, that we hadn't been intimate in years. He probably said I didn't understand him like you do, that you two had a connection he'd never experienced before. How did you—" "Because those are the same lines cheating husbands have been using for decades, Sophia. You're not special. This situation isn't unique. You're just the latest in a very long line of women who believed a married man's lies about his wife." Laura could hear Sophia crying softly on the other end of the line. "The difference is," Laura continued, "I'm not going, quietly, and I'm not letting Marcus walk away from 23 years of marriage with a slap on the wrist. So if you're planning a future with him, you should know that future is going to be significantly more expensive than either of you anticipated." That evening, Laura sat in her kitchen, the same kitchen where she'd first discovered Marcus's lies and opened a bottle of wine. Not to celebrate exactly, but to mark the end of one phase of her life and the beginning of another. Her phone buzzed with a text from Kate. "Holy shit, Laura. I just heard from Mom. Are you okay? Do you need anything?" Laura typed back. "I'm better than I've been in months. And yes, I need something. A good recommendation for a real estate agent. I'm going to need to sell the house." The next morning, Laura would discover that Marcus had spent the night at Sophia's apartment and that he'd already hired his own attorney. The war Victoria had promised was about to begin in earnest. But tonight, Laura Mitchell sat in her beautiful home, surrounded by the life she'd built with a man who'd thrown it all away, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years: the intoxicating power of being in complete control of her own destiny. 6 months later, Laura sat across from Marcus in a sterile conference room at the Cook County Courthouse, watching her soon-to-be ex-husband sign the final divorce decree. His signature looked different now, shakier, less confident than the bold strokes she remembered from their wedding certificate. Marcus had aged visibly during their legal battle. The stress of fighting on multiple fronts, the divorce, the IRS investigation into his business practices, and the civil lawsuit from his former business partner, had carved new lines around his eyes and turned more of his hair gray. Beside him sat his attorney, a competent but clearly exhausted man who'd spent months trying to minimize the damage Laura and Victoria had systematically inflicted. Across the table, Victoria reviewed the settlement documents with the satisfaction of a chess master reviewing a perfectly executed endgame. "The final settlement," Victoria announced, "awards Mrs. Mitchell 47% of all marital assets, including her portion of Mitchell Construction's valuation, plus $280,000 in compensation for the marital funds used to finance Mr. Mitchell's extramarital relationship." Laura kept her expression neutral, but inside she felt a surge of vindication. That was better than any drug. The settlement was more than she'd hoped for when this began, but then again, Marcus had made more mistakes than even she'd initially suspected. The business audit had revealed that Marcus hadn't just been using company funds for Sophia. He'd been engaging in tax avoidance schemes that bordered on fraud, routing personal expenses through fake business accounts, and failing to report substantial income. When the IRS got involved, Marcus's position had become untenable. The final blow had come when Ron Castellano, Marcus's business partner of 8 years, had filed his own lawsuit after discovering that Marcus had been making unauthorized financial decisions without consulting him. Ron's betrayal had cut Marcus deeper than the divorce itself. She could see it in the way his shoulders sagged whenever his former partner's name was mentioned. Additionally, Victoria continued, Mr. Mitchell will maintain responsibility for all business-related debts and legal obligations, while Mrs. Mitchell retains full ownership of the Winnetka property and all personal assets acquired during the marriage. Marcus's attorney whispered something in his ear, but Marcus shook his head without looking up from the papers. He'd fought hard in the beginning, hiring investigators to dig up dirt on Laura, threatening to drag out the proceedings for years, even attempting to hide assets in offshore accounts. But Laura and Victoria had been 3 steps ahead at every turn. The private investigator Marcus hired had found nothing, because Laura's life was exactly what it appeared to be. She'd been a faithful wife and responsible financial partner throughout their marriage. Meanwhile, Jake's investigation had uncovered layer after layer of Marcus's deception, including a second credit card Sophia had been using and a joint bank account Marcus had opened with her using business funds. When Marcus signed the last page, he finally looked up at Laura. "I hope you're happy," he said quietly. Laura considered the question seriously. Happy wasn't quite the right word for what she felt. Satisfied, certainly. Vindicated, absolutely. But happy would come later, she thought, when she'd had time to build something new from the ashes of what Marcus had destroyed. "I'm content with justice being served," she replied. "I hope you and Sophia find what you're looking for." It wasn't entirely magnanimous. Laura knew exactly what Marcus and Sophia were facing. With his business crippled by legal fees and government investigations, his reputation in tatters, and his liquid assets depleted by the settlement, Marcus's golden future with his young girlfriend was looking significantly less golden. According to Jake, who'd continued monitoring the situation out of professional curiosity, Sophia had moved out of the expensive Lincoln Park apartment 2 months ago. The stress of being the subject of gossip at work, combined with the reality of Marcus's financial situation, had apparently cooled her ardor for their great romance. Marcus stood to leave, then hesitated. "Laura, for what it's worth, I am sorry. Not for leaving. We both know we weren't happy anymore. But for how I did it. You deserved better than lies." Laura looked at this man she'd loved for more than half her adult life, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. He wasn't evil, just weak and selfish in the way of people who'd never had to face real consequences for their actions. "Yes," she said simply. "I did deserve better." After Marcus and his attorney left, Laura and Victoria sat alone in the conference room, reviewing the final documents. Laura felt oddly deflated now that it was over. For months, the divorce had consumed her life, given her purpose and direction. Now she faced the prospect of figuring out what came next. "So," Victoria said, closing her briefcase with a satisfied snap, "what will you do now?" Laura had been thinking about that question for weeks. The settlement had left her financially secure, not wealthy, but comfortable enough to make choices based on what she wanted, rather than what she needed. "I'm thinking about starting my own consulting firm," she said. "Forensic accounting, maybe specializing in divorce cases. I've discovered I have a talent for finding hidden assets." Victoria laughed, the first genuinely warm expression Laura had seen from her. "You'd be excellent at that. You have the skills, and more importantly, you understand the emotional stakes involved." That evening, Laura drove through her old neighborhood, one last time before the new owners took possession of the house. She'd sold it for significantly more than she and Marcus had paid, another small victory in a war full of them. The Tudor-style home looked exactly the same from the outside. The careful landscaping she'd maintained, the seasonal decorations she'd changed religiously, the perfect suburban facade that had hidden so much unhappiness. New owners would make new memories here, hopefully happier ones. Laura's new condo in River North was smaller, but it was hers alone. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every decision had been made by her for her own preferences. After 23 years of compromise and accommodation, the simple act of choosing her own throw pillows had felt revolutionary. Her phone buzzed with a text from Kate. "Dinner to celebrate?" "I'm buying." Laura smiled and typed back, "Absolutely. But I'm buying. I can afford it now." As she drove toward the city, Laura thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago. Passive, trusting, willing to ignore obvious signs of betrayal for the sake of keeping peace. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone she'd once known, but had outgrown. The divorce had cost her a marriage, but it had given her something more valuable. The knowledge that she was capable of fighting for herself, of being strategic and ruthless when necessary, of surviving betrayal and emerging stronger. 3 weeks later, Laura was meeting with her first potential client, a woman named Jennifer, whose husband had been acting suspiciously about money. Jennifer sat across from Laura in the sleek office space she'd rented in the Loop, her hands shaking as she described finding unexplained withdrawals in their joint account. "I keep telling myself I'm being paranoid," Jennifer said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But the signs are all there, aren't they? The late nights, the new clothes, the way he guards his phone like it's nuclear codes." Laura recognized herself from 6 months ago in Jennifer's uncertainty, the desperate hope that suspicions might be unfounded, even when all evidence pointed to betrayal. She leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Jennifer, you're not paranoid. You're observant. And you're being smart by getting professional help before making any decisions." Laura pulled out a legal pad. "Tell me about these withdrawals. When did they start, and do you see any patterns?" As Jennifer outlined her concerns, Laura felt the familiar thrill of a puzzle taking shape. Numbers didn't lie. Patterns emerged. If you knew how to look for them, and men who thought they were being clever about hiding affairs were usually more predictable than they realized. "What I'm going to do," Laura explained, "is conduct a complete financial analysis of your family's accounts, credit reports, and spending patterns. If your husband is having an affair and using marital assets to fund it, I'll find the evidence. More importantly, I'll document it in a way that protects your interests if you decide to file for divorce." Jennifer's relief was palpable. "You really think you can prove it?" Laura smiled, thinking of Marcus's shocked face when the sheriff had served him with papers in front of his entire office. "Jennifer, cheating husbands always think they're smarter than their wives. They rarely are." 2 months later, Laura had built a thriving practice. Word of mouth in Chicago's social circles had brought her a steady stream of clients. Women who'd heard about the accountant who took Marcus Mitchell for everything he was worth, and wanted that same fierce advocacy for themselves. Her reputation grew with each case. She'd helped Patricia Hendricks discover that her husband was funneling money to a gambling addiction disguised as business investments. She'd assisted Margaret Torres in uncovering a complex scheme where her husband had been transferring assets to his brother to hide them before filing for divorce. In each case, Laura's combination of financial expertise and hard-won wisdom about marital deception proved devastating to unfaithful spouses who thought they could outsmart the system. The work was satisfying in ways her old job had never been. She wasn't just analyzing numbers, she was helping women reclaim their power, their dignity, and their financial security. On a crisp October afternoon, Laura was reviewing case files in her office when her assistant buzzed her. "Laura, there's a Marcus Mitchell here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important." Laura felt her pulse quicken, though whether from anxiety or anticipation she couldn't say. "Send him in." Marcus entered her office, looking like a man who'd been through a war. His expensive suit was gone, replaced by khakis and a polo shirt that had seen better days. The confident swagger she remembered had been replaced by something approaching humility. "Hello, Laura." He looked around her office, taking in the modern furniture, the framed diplomas, the subtle indicators of success. "Nice place. I heard you're doing well." "I am." Laura gestured to the chair across from her desk. "What can I do for you, Marcus?" He sat heavily, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I wanted to apologize. Not the bullshit apology I gave you at the courthouse. A real one, for all of it." Laura studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculation. She found none. just exhaustion, and what appeared to be genuine remorse. "What happened with Sophia?" she asked. Marcus laughed bitterly. "What do you think happened?" Turns out 26-year-olds aren't that interested in 42-year-old men with legal problems and damaged credit. She moved back to California last month. Got a job with a tech startup, I heard. Laura felt no satisfaction in his pain, which surprised her. 6 months ago, she would have wanted him to suffer. Now she mostly felt sorry for him. And the business? Gone. Ron bought out my share for pennies on the dollar, which was probably more than it was worth after all the legal fees and government fines. Marcus rubbed his temples. "I'm working for a construction company in Schaumburg now. Project manager. It's honest work, but it's not what I thought I'd be doing at 52. They sat in silence for a moment. Two people who'd once shared everything, now separated by choices that couldn't be undone. "Why are you here, Marcus?" "Because I wanted you to know that you were right. About all of it. I was selfish and stupid, and I threw away the best thing in my life for something that was never real." He met her eyes directly. "You deserved better than what I gave you, and I'm glad you took it." Laura felt something shift inside her, a loosening of anger she hadn't realized she was still carrying. "Thank you for saying that." Marcus stood to leave, then turned back. "For what it's worth, I think what you're doing now is important. Helping women like," he gestured vaguely, "like you were, before you became this version of yourself." After he left, Laura sat in her office as the autumn sun slanted through her windows, thinking about transformations. Marcus was right. She had become a different version of herself. Stronger, more independent, less willing to accept less than she deserved. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Kate. "Hey, are you free for dinner tonight? There's someone I want you to meet." Laura smiled. Kate had been trying to set her up for months, convinced that Laura was ready to start dating again. Laura wasn't sure she agreed, but she was, open to possibilities in ways she hadn't been before. "Male or female?" Laura asked, knowing Kate's track record with blind dates. "Male. David Chen. He's an architect, divorced about 2 years ago, has 2 teenage kids. Very normal, very stable, very much not a cheating asshole." "Chen?" Laura paused. "Any relation to—" "God, no. Common name, Laura. Plus, this guy's actually trustworthy." Laura laughed, realizing that the name Sophia Chen no longer triggered the same spike of anger it once had. Time and success had a way of healing wounds that once seemed mortal. "Okay, but somewhere public and I'm driving myself. Deal. 7:30 at that new place on Michigan Avenue." That evening, Laura stood in front of her bedroom mirror, applying the same mascara she'd worn on the morning she'd filed for divorce. But everything else was different. The apartment, the clothes, the woman looking back at her from the glass. She thought about the path that had brought her here. From betrayed, wife to strategic opponent to successful businesswoman to whatever she was becoming next. Each phase had required her to be someone slightly different, to access parts of herself she hadn't known existed. As she grabbed her keys and headed out to meet Kate's architect, Laura reflected on the most important lesson she'd learned. She was capable of surviving anything, including the destruction of everything she'd thought she wanted. Marcus had taken away her marriage, her security, and her illusions about love. In return, she'd taken everything he'd actually valued: his money, his business, his reputation, and his carefully constructed future. It had been, she thought with satisfaction, a fair trade. But more importantly, she discovered that Laura Mitchell, not the wife, not the bookkeeper, not the woman who'd spent 23 years accommodating someone else's needs, was someone worth fighting for. And that knowledge was worth more than any settlement, more valuable than any revenge, and more powerful than any betrayal could destroy. 6 months ago, Laura had been a woman whose husband left her for his secretary. Today, she was a woman who'd built something better from the wreckage of that betrayal. Tomorrow, she would be whatever she chose to become next. The war was over. Laura had won. But more importantly, she'd learned that winning wasn't about destroying your enemies. It was about refusing to let them destroy you. As she walked into the restaurant to meet a man who might or might not become part of her next chapter, Laura Mitchell smiled with the confidence of a woman who knew exactly who she was and what she was worth. It had taken a divorce to find herself, but the woman she'd become was worth every difficult step of the journey.